So this video is about tools to build your own motorcycle, whether it's going to be a cafe racer, a scrambler, a bobber, it doesn't really matter. I want to just list a bunch of hand tools that you'll need for the build and then progress into maybe the more advanced tools that you can get to actually build this thing and turn it into whatever you have as your dream motorcycle. Where this idea came from was obviously a lot of my comments, but also two friends of mine who are actually building their own cafe races and they've never done anything like this. And so they've come to me and they've asked me, what tools should I get? What tools are going to be the ones that I definitely need? And so I thought this would be a really good video. So here we go, let's get into it. So here's a table full of tools, tools that I use regularly and tools that I think you will need if you're going to build a cafe racer. And I'm going to go through them in no particular order, but I'm just going to go through them and then maybe explain a little bit about them if I think that's suitable. So for starters, the grinder. The grinder can do a couple of things. It can obviously cut steel, you can obviously grind steel, sand down steel, which is, I don't use a grinding disc as such, I use these flapper discs. You can get them in different grit, and I just use those when I'm trying to clean something up. Like I said, different grit for whatever you're working on. Cutting steel, cutting things, cutting the frame, use a cutting disc, super awesome and just so fast. They do make a lot of sparks though, so just be mindful around you because, you know, you can start fires quite easily. A wire wheel, a wire brush, more like a wire wheel I guess. These things are really hardcore on the grinders, so just keep mindful of that because they'll clean up powder coating and paint fairly quick on steel, but just make sure you wear the right safety gear because those little wire pieces will come out at some stupid rate and hit you and they hurt like hell. So if they get you in the eyes, you'll know about it, so make sure you wear some protective gear. Another thing is, talking about wire brushes, is this guy here. That just goes in the actual drill. It's a little bit, you know, less speed, less aggressiveness, but it's good to clean things up if you need to. Wire brush, obviously, just handy to clean things up before you paint them, and just a handy little cheap thing to have. Going through, you know, the measuring side of things, tape measure is a must, definitely. Verniers, like I said, verniers are handy in a few different ways. If you're measuring the external side of something, which is obviously, you know, let's say we're measuring this, it can also do the internal measurements. If you don't know this, this was probably going to help you. But also, if you're measuring the depth of a thread, you also have this one at the back, which can also do that. So you push that in internally if you go inside something, and it will tell you the depth of it. So 3 ways to measure with a set of verniers, and they're not that expensive. They look expensive, but they're really not. Tape measure, you really can't get away without having a tape measure. Now files are good. You can get all different types. This is what's called a half round. Focus. So this one's what's called a half round, and there's a whole bunch of different ones: flat ones, round ones, square ones, triangular ones, triangularly. I think I just made up a word. Triangular shaped ones. Anyway, they are handy for certain things. Now a square, something else that I would definitely recommend having. Cutting straight lines, yeah, definitely worth having to try and get that right angle. Now these are deburrers. Not necessarily a must-have, but definitely really handy for what they are, for the price they are. This is obviously a deburrer for a countersink, so drill a hole and then you just, you know, steel, aluminium, plastic, whatever it is, it'll just take it out. And this guy here is also a deburrer, and it spins around. It's got a cutting edge on the internal side, so if you drill a hole and, you know, you want to do this, it'll clean out that hole. So another really handy tool. Marking stuff. Now I've always used a pencil or engineering chalk, you know, for steel or whatever. It's really hard to see, so I've just recently stepped up to this guy. This guy is awesome. Like, it's a pencil, I guess, or more like a crayon, and it just does a really good job of marking things. So it doesn't come off real easy, so I think they're awesome. I've just, like I said, stepped up to this because I got sick of rubbing my marks off, so that thing's cool. A set of screwdrivers is something that I'll say definitely grab. These are just 2, Phillips and a flat, but you will need a whole set, really. If you can get a cheap set, grab a cheap set, but worst case, just have a Phillips and a flat. A center punch. If you're going to drill a hole in something like steel, if you've ever drilled steel, you'll find when you try and start the hole, it just keeps wandering around the place. If you have a center punch, it doesn't have to be this one. This one's automatic, but just some sort of center punch that you can put in there and bang the end of it with a hammer, and it'll just give you a dent. And the dent is where you can start your drill point. So you may know that already, but if you haven't got one of these automatic ones, they're really good for tight spaces because you can't swing a hammer in there. They're about the same price as the standard center punch, so if you can get an automatic one, why not? So if you're going to do any electrical work, something might not be working on your bike, or you want to, rewire it, or just do some repairs, then a multimeter is handy to have. Not necessary, you don't have to have it, but it's just handy to, problem solve. And any sort of wiring that you might do, you will need a soldering iron and some solder to go with it. Not definitely needed, but handy if you're going to do wiring on your bike. Clamps. Clamps can come in so many different varieties. I use these guys. They're great for hot work because they're all steel. There are other clamps that I do use. So this is another great one I use just purely because it's a lot bigger and it can just hang on to things. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just they're not good for hot work. So if you're going to do welding or plasma cutting or anything like that, then yeah, they just won't be that good because they've got a rubber set of jaws. So good for other things. Now pliers. Pliers, if I had a choice between the two, I would always go these guys, but needle nose or long nose pliers are super handy. I'm going to say handy so many times. Actually, I'm going to put a tally up with how many times I say handy, because I'm going to say it a lot. A set of pliers, long nose, are great to have, worth getting if you can get a set. These are circlip removers. Not necessarily needed, but you will be surprised how handy they are, or worth having if you've ever tried to take a circlip out without them. You'll know what I mean. So once again, may not be too expensive, but not necessarily needed. This is something I would probably purchase once you get to it. If you get to that point and you realize you need them, then go and grab them. But until then, it's just something that I thought I'd put in this kit. Allen keys are a must, depending on whatever bike you're working on. These are obviously metric, because that's most of the stuff that I do. I do have the other set just in case. These guys here are, there's a few different names for them. They're crescent wrench or adjustable wrench, adjustable spanner, a shifter. I would always resort to going with the right size wrench or right size spanner before I went for this, but these guys undoubtedly are very handy to have. A set of locking jaw pliers or vice grips, as the brand is. So they're undoubtedly one of those very, very useful things to have. Once you own a set, you'll understand what I mean. Working with, small things and hanging onto them and cutting them with a grinder or grinding them down, trying to pick up something hot like steel that you've welded or ground, and then put it into a cold bucket of water. They're just really good to have. So with all of this stuff that I'm mentioning, make sure you grab yourself some safety glasses. I like to wear full face if I can. I've had some pretty hot things and sharp things hit me in the face, so protecting your eyes is one good thing, but if you can protect your whole face, why not? Moving up here is, like I mentioned earlier on, it's the wire brush, but a full set of drill bits. You'll be amazed at the different sizes that you'll need when you're working on these bikes. So if you can do that, get that. If you can't, buy the ones you need as you need them. It's also another way to do it. And a drill. Doesn't matter what brand you get, but I do recommend getting a half decent drill. The two hammers that I have are completely different purposes. Obviously you've got a ball peen hammer. If you're going to work on something, you really want to wallop it. That's something that you'd need, like a ball peen. Doesn't have to be ball peen, just a hammer, a steel hammer is good. But this guy here is if you want to hit something, but you don't necessarily want to damage the thing you're hitting, but you want it to move. Like when you're working with engine bits and pieces or working with components around the bike. I use it a lot, to bang in the axles and stuff like that. Just, it's handy. I know I'm not going to smash or mushroom the end of the axle. You don't have to have it, but I thought I'd put on the table anyway. So there's a couple more things which are larger items and also larger in price, which is having yourself a socket set and spanner set or wrench set, wherever you're from, whatever you call it. So these guys are just, you have to have if you're going to take anything off a bike. And obviously depending on where the bike was made is depending if you need metric or imperial. So yeah, that's a must. Now this guy is not something you really have to have unless you pull your engine apart, start doing things like that. What it is, it's a torque wrench. This one's just one of many out there that you can buy, and this one's it's just something that you will need if you're going to pull an engine apart. You need to make sure you torque those bolts up to the correct spec. Now another very, very, very handy thing, if you're sick of working on the ground, you don't have anything to hang on to something while you're cutting it or grinding it or drilling it, a bench vise. This guy is mounted to just a little box frame thing that I made for two purposes. One, so that I can actually put this to the edge of my bench and then clamp it down with a clamp like this, and that'll secure it so that I can do whatever I need to do, so that it's not taking up valuable real estate on a bench. This is the bench that I work on most of the time. It's actually not a bench, it's actually a table saw with the top on it. So it's just something that I've obviously multi-purpose to do other things rather than just be a big table saw sitting there and gathering junk. It's now my work table. But it's also, this black box has also been designed to fit inside these jaws on this three-legged Titan super jaws. So this whole orange thing is probably the most handy thing I have in the entire workshop. It's one of those things you can just fold up, put in the corner. I've mentioned it many, many times in the channel, but if you don't have a set and you have limited room, worth getting. It's just a foot vise that is pushed down and you can lock anything into those jaws, but not really good for hot work because these are rubber. You can obviously take those jaws out if you wanted to, the rubber bits, and have it steel on steel. But if I'm working on something and I want it to be a little bit higher, I grab that, put it in there, and then I can do any welding and grinding and plasma cutting and do all that sort of stuff. There's a lot more to go on this list. This is not a full, this is what you need and nothing else. There's so many more things I can mention, but I just pretty much culled it down to as minimal as possible to make it easy for you to digest and work out. Maybe you have a garage and there's a few of these things that you might want. I will leave links in the description below for most of this stuff. Obviously they're going to be different brands and things, but I'll find the ones that are almost exactly what I have because they're the ones that I'll recommend. And the other thing that you probably need is a garage stereo. This is an old girl, it's even got cassettes in it, but it doesn't matter what sort of stereo you have, you need tunes. So I just plug my phone into it and wire up and off she goes. So maybe you already own a lot of these hand tools, and if you do, that's great. But if you don't, I can almost guarantee at some point throughout the build you'll use every single one of those things on that bench that I just showed you. But what I'm going to show you now is a bunch of other things that I think will be also handy, not necessarily needed. Maybe a few of them will be needed, but I just want to show you them anyway because I think it's worth putting in the video. So on this table here is a bunch of air tools. You're obviously going to need an air compressor to run these. My air compressor is tucked in the back corner there. Can't really see it, it's covered up with a few other things, but you're going to need yourself a decent air compressor. I wouldn't get the cheapest one out there because if you're going to run something like this belt grinder or belt sander, it's going to need a fair bit of air. The small ones are a little bit easier on the air, like this is a power file. This guy here is a die grinder. You could also use, I guess a Dremel would do the same thing as a die grinder, so you don't need the air. Obviously if you want to clean filters and clean things down, having an air gun, this is just one that I put together. But yeah, spraying glue, spray painting, even something like sandblasting. Just keep in mind if you do get into the sandblasting side of things, you're going to need a seriously big air compressor. But I do have a sandblasting cabinet. My air compressor is not really suitable, constantly runs and it runs out of air all the time, so I will need a bigger one if I continue doing it a lot more. But the next step would be a welder. There's so many different welders out there and there's so much confusion as to what welder is going to be best for you doing your bike building, and I totally understand that. If you're in the position where you can get one, you can fabricate your own parts like electric trays, making little brackets here and there, welding things up, welding your own hoop on. A welder is definitely something I would highly recommend having if you're in the position to get one. This is the SigWeld 3-in-1, a 185 Ultra. If you're in New Zealand or Australia, this is available to you, but unfortunately they haven't released it to everywhere else. It is automatic. In other words, you just tell the machine what size wire thickness you're going to use and what material you're going to weld, and it'll do everything else for you. You can also put it on a manual, which I like to do, and do everything like that, but it is automatic if you want to get that side of it. Now, to break down welding, the easiest way I can explain it to you is you've got three styles of welders. You've got the stick welder, you've got the MIG welder, and you've got the TIG. Unless you intend on, getting right into welding, you probably won't want a TIG. But if you're happy with just being able to point and shoot, a MIG is the way to go. But if you're just you're on a really tight budget, you just want to stick metal together, you want the cheapest option, then I would probably go with a stick. And that's the easiest way I can explain it to you without having to go right into the depth of the different gases to use and the wire and how to set these things up. I don't want to make this video complicated. With any of these welders that you purchase, you will probably want to get yourself a welding helmet. It doesn't have to be an automatic one. You can get one of those generic helmets. They're a lot cheaper. You also need a set of gloves, because if you're going to use a MIG or a stick, you're going to get spatter and it hurts when it hits you. Also a jacket, something protective just to stop it from hitting your skin. And that's pretty much what you need if you're going to weld. Down here is a plasma cutter. I use that in some of my videos you may have seen. Really handy to cut steel if you're trying to do some nice crazy round things, curves, which you can't do with a grinder. The plasma cutter is awesome for that. I did an entire video with me building a flag out of stainless steel sheet, an Australian flag for Australia Day, and it was really cool. I used this guy for the first time and it was absolutely awesome fun. So not something that you definitely need to build bikes though. It's just a plasma cutter, which is just fun to have, good to have for certain projects, but not necessarily needed for bike building. Something else that I do use occasionally is this guy here. It's just a bench mounted drill press. I use it for things like when I'm trying to drill something and I want it to be nice and straight. It won't always get it perfectly straight, obviously, but this is all done by hand. Everything that I do is done by hand, so I don't expect it to be perfect, but it's just, if I'm doing multiple holes, I'll pull this thing out because it'll just make life a lot easier than trying to drill it with a drill, a cordless drill or a power drill. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that one. And it lives down here, and what also is down here is a shop press. I purchased this because by the time I paid somebody else to push bearings in or push bearings out, it would have been easier for me to just grab this and then I would have paid for itself. So that's what I've got. It's tucked away in this little cabinet thing here because I don't use it that often, but it's good to have. So this little guy here is what's known as a pan brake. It'll do 1.6 if it's the full length, which is 300 millimeters. Or if you're doing smaller pieces, then it'll do, I think, 2 millimeters thick. So it won't do really, really heavy duty steel, but for your electric trays and regulator rectifier trays and things like that, it's perfect for that. You wouldn't want anything thicker than that. It's great for little jobs, and it's handy because you can just take it out and put it on a shelf. So hopefully by me sharing the tools that I use and recommend will help you make a more informative decision as to what you might need if you're starting out building a bike for yourself. If there's any tools in there that you think I may have missed or something that you would like me to talk more about, just leave me a comment. And if there's any of these tools that you want to purchase for yourself, I'll leave a link to my Amazon store below, which I'll have most of these tools. Some of the large ones won't be there, obviously, but all of the smaller stuff that I have mentioned will definitely be there. And if you do purchase something, just remember that I will get a kickback from that, and that'll support the channel and therefore keep these videos going. So have an amazing day, and I'll chat with you in the next video.